This spring, we went on a long 7,168-mile road trip from Utah to Key West, Florida and back in our Tesla Model Y. And I'll be publishing a video series of that road trip as soon as I can get it edited. In the meantime, in this video, I wanted to share my experience with the Tesla full self-driving trial that conveniently Tesla enabled for us on April 1st, which was day 11 of our 22-day road trip. We just arrived in the Orlando, Florida area last night at a relative's house where we're staying. And right now we're on about 9th day of our 22-day, 7,000-mile road trip all over the southeast of the United States. And yesterday we got a notification of a software update, but we needed to connect to Wi-Fi. And then while we were at superchargers during the day, there was some free Wi-Fi at a couple of locations and the car successfully downloaded it. Now, I don't normally install software updates while we're on a road trip, but I made an exception in this case because of two reasons. One, we still have a lot of time and driving left ahead of us. And when you need a software update to install, it's popping up constantly every time you put the car in park, and it's really annoying. And secondly, just recently, Elon said that they were going to be allowing all vehicles that are capable of full self-driving to have a 1-month trial of it. And I knew that, so I thought, hey, this software update maybe will enable that. And sure enough, look at this. I started the software update installing last night, and here this morning now it's telling me that I have my autopilot package upgraded and that it's telling me to go ahead and enable it. So I'm excited to try this out for the first time, or for my first time. And we're on a road trip, so we have plenty of time to experiment with it. And in circumstances where I need to drive more aggressively, because here in Florida especially, but in metropolis centers, in theory this will work, but I'm not trusting or experienced with it enough. I'll probably enable it and disable it as I desire. But I'm excited to try it and be very vigilant and careful while using it and see how well it works for us. So it has a disclaimer here that it's in beta and pretty standard legalese here, letting you know that you're consenting to this stuff. So we'll go ahead and try it out, but I might turn it back off depending on how it performs and if I feel like it's worth it. I guess maybe now I need to go into the menu. Oh, see, autopilot now has a blue dot, and then we have full self-driving beta, and that's enabled already. So I guess I'll just go out and try it now on the road. Oh, actually down here it has assertive, chill, average. So we'll start with average and I'll experiment with that. And then lane change notification. In our case, I do want to know when it's planning on changing lanes, but we are often listening to audiobooks and I don't want to interrupt their audiobook with noise that's unnecessary. So I'm going to put it on vibrate, see how well that works. Some of the rest, oh, this is the same as before. So there's just a couple of settings up here relating to it. So I'm going to experiment with this and let you know what I find out. At that point in the trip, we had already driven 3,025 miles using basic autopilot, but with the commander from the S3XY buttons that auto-resumes basic autopilot after lane changes. I was quite enjoying that experience, which almost entirely restores the functionality that I missed from our Gen 1 Mobileye autopilot of our 2015 Model S, which will change lanes for you when you turn on your blinker. Unfortunately, the way Tesla's in-house autopilot software has divided basic autopilot from their more advanced driver assistance functionality is they will only lane keep and won't change lanes at all. You have to disengage autopilot, change lanes manually, then re-enable autopilot. It doesn't sound like a lot, but it gets annoying doing that hundreds of times a day when driving many hours in the day. Now, with the commander in my Model Y, I could turn on the blinker and it would disengage autopilot where I would then change lanes manually. Then 1 second after the blinker stopped, the commander automatically resumes autopilot. I was elated 4 days into our trip when I saw Elon's X post on March 25th that the FSD trial was going to be enabled for all vehicles capable of it. Then exactly a week later, and exactly in the middle of our road trip, I received the email from Tesla that my trial had begun. As a general rule of thumb, I avoid installing firmware updates on our Tesla when we're on a trip because if something goes wrong and something bad happens from it, I could be super annoyed for a lot of driving until we get back home, or worst case, it strands us away from home. In this case, I decided to make an exception for the obvious huge benefit of being able to put lots of miles on the FSD trial to really test it out. Also, it helped that we were safely at a relative's house in the Orlando, Florida area, so if the car had issues, the Tesla service center was only 25 miles away. As opposed to just the day prior, we were camped on a dispersed camping road in a remote location on the border between Tennessee and Georgia, which is most certainly where nobody should ever install a firmware update. I will share more of my initial experiences with the FSD trial during the road trip in that road trip video series, so I recommend subscribing to get automatically notified when those videos publish. In today's video, I want to share my conclusions after using it for the entire 30 days. I used FSD throughout the remainder of that road trip as much as I possibly could, as well as once we got home from the trip, just driving around our hometown. Over that time, we've put 4,622 miles on the car, and the vast majority of those miles were driven by FSD, with many disengagements. Throughout that time, I kept a notepad open where I noted observations throughout the experience. The day before the FSD trial, as we drove from Tennessee into the Orlando, Florida area, I noticed a significant increase in aggressiveness and speed in traffic of Florida. I adapted to that as we drove. Right away with FSD driving, I noticed a significant disparity between the way it drove and all of the traffic around me, and I was afraid I was going to get rear-ended from angry drivers, so I learned quickly I had to constantly cover the accelerator to make it go faster. It's important to note here that I did have the FSD settings set to assertive, and I had the max speed set to the general speed of the vehicles around me. Alright, this is my first time. Girls, this is my first time using full self-driving. What do you think? Is it the same?
I don't know.
Yeah, it looks the same to you.
What's
And actually,
full self-driving?
it's where the car is driving itself. More than autopilot, it's going to change lanes and stuff.
Hold up your hands.
But I have to keep my hand on the wheel.
Why?
This is how it works. It's still beta.
So he doesn't go to sleep. He still has to pay attention.
Yep, definitely. That day we only drove about 3 hours round trip out to the Kennedy Space Center and back, which was an awesome experience, by the way. Girls, do you see all of those rockets way over there past the sign?
Yes.
On the left?
Yeah.
That's where we're going to be going. The next day we drove down to the southern tip of Florida, and somehow traffic managed to get even faster and more aggressive. I was somewhat shocked. I've driven many tens of thousands of miles. Actually, probably by this point in my life, I've driven over 100,000 miles around the United States during road trips alone. And the Miami, Florida area has about the most aggressive drivers around. St. Louis, Missouri was the other most aggressive driver area in our entire trip. In my experience, aggressive driving behavior is common in heavily populated areas. By aggressive, I mean, high speed, like 20 plus miles over the speed limit, weaving between lanes, tailgating, changing lanes right behind me inches from my rear bumper, etc. I explain that because it's the setting I was immediately testing FSD in, and I had to disengage FSD repeatedly as I tried not to get my new car wrecked and endanger my family. Luckily, the majority of our trip was more on rural roads that were not heavily congested, but I outlined all of this to explain that I tested FSD in many varied driving conditions over the last 30 days. So let's get into my list of observations now. My first observation, which ended up being a constant throughout the entire test, is that Tesla's FSD is a left lane loafer. It rarely ever moved on its own back to the right lane after passing a vehicle. In fact, sometimes I would be driving in the right lane and there was nobody in sight in front of us, and it would just merge to the left lane, displaying text on the screen saying, "Changing lanes to stay out of the rightmost lane." It would even do this on roads that clearly posted signs every few miles to stay in the rightmost lane except when passing. It should default to the right lane at all times on a two-lane road. My guess is it's programmed for a freeway with more than 2 lanes. In those situations, it is better to avoid the rightmost lane where people are entering and exiting the freeway. But the vast majority of roads are either 1 or 2 lanes in the same direction, so that behavior should clearly be programmed only when there are more than 2 lanes. Sometimes I would let it go to the left lane for no reason or after passing someone, and when there was nobody immediately behind me, I would wait for many miles to see if it would eventually go back to the right lane, and it just wouldn't. Unless a vehicle was approaching speedily from the rear, then it would get over. If a vehicle just slowly approached from the rear, then it still wouldn't get over, and if I didn't intervene, the approaching car would just pass me on the right, which is exactly what I would have done if I were them. This behavior was consistent whether there were 5 lanes or 2. It just wants to be in the passing lane on the far left. Also, when I did decide to intervene by turning on the blinker to go back to the right lane, it would often take a good 5 seconds of the blinker blinking before the car would even begin to start changing lanes. And 5 seconds is an eternity when there's somebody just a couple of feet from your rear bumper anxious to get past you. Sometimes I just had to force it over faster, which would disengage full self-driving, then I would re-enable it right away. Staying in the passing lane is obviously not the correct highway etiquette, but it wouldn't be as big of a deal if it would maintain my max set speed. But it kept slowing down, so I had to keep covering the accelerator to maintain my desired speed. Don't get me wrong, I wasn't trying to maintain crazy fast speeds or anything. I'm talking about just trying to maintain the average driving speed of traffic around me. It would just randomly slow down, seemingly for no reason. Let's talk about follow distance. This is kind of a tricky one. Obviously, a healthy follow distance is important for safety, whether someone slams on their brakes in front of you, or perhaps to have more response time if there are road debris on the road, or any number of scenarios. The difficulty comes into play as anyone who has ever driven in heavy traffic knows that if you try to maintain too large of a gap in front of you, which FSD does, that people will constantly merge into that gap. Then FSD slows down to maintain its desired follow distance, but it then endangers your backside from vehicles not happy that you just made them slow down. I'm sure semi-truck drivers run into this problem constantly, but their risk of damage or injury from getting rear-ended is way less. For this reason, I had to once again constantly cover the accelerator pedal and coax it forward in some situations to better maintain central spacing with traffic. What's strange to me though is if I was driving in the right lane behind a slower car and there was a car passing me on the left, the moment that that car just barely passed me on the left, FSD would go ahead and merge to the left lane with a very minimal follow distance, way less than its normal and way less than I was comfortable with. Then it would slow down to increase the follow distance. Instead, it should have just waited longer to merge to the left to maintain its speed, and then moved over once there was a good follow distance. Oh, and another thing about the follow distance is it needs to be more elastic, meaning larger follow distance at higher speeds, less follow distance at slower speeds, and if vehicles merge in front, it needs to be more gradual about its lessening of its speed to compensate over a larger period of time. Many times FSD would try to merge left when I didn't see a need to, and I had to constantly cancel it, like constantly, sometimes just seconds apart. A couple of times there was a stopped vehicle way off the side of the road, a safe distance from traffic to the point where there's no reason to merge to the left or slow down, and yet FSD would slow down a lot. So once again, I learned to cover the accelerator pedal to maintain speed. Often when cresting a short, steep hill, it is unsure of what's coming and slows down dramatically. While to some inexperienced people that may seem like the wise thing to do, I'm talking about regions where this is just life. I grew up in Missouri where there are many miles of literally hours of driving of constant hills. Yes, there's a risk of cresting a hill and there's something undesirable in the way, like a tractor or a deer, etc. And that's why you drive the appropriate speed and pay a lot of attention when cresting each hill, and you hit the friction brakes the moment something is there. But to dramatically slow down right at the crest, then heavily speed up going down is super annoying and an inefficient way to drive in those regions, in my opinion. My normal driving behavior in any vehicle is to try to use the friction brakes as little as possible, whether it's a gas or electric car. Regen braking in EVs is one of my favorite features. FSD uses the friction brakes way too much. I have no idea why this is the case, but I had to constantly, in many decelerations, very slightly press the accelerator to keep FSD from engaging the friction brakes and instead let the regen braking do its thing. However, sometimes FSD didn't start slowing down soon enough for regen braking to slow us down enough, so it created an awkward moment where I'd have to go ahead and let it use the friction brakes because we actually now needed them to stop in time and would stop way faster than I would like. I often wanted to communicate to FSD saying, "Start slowing down now," to stop in time with regen braking only. But in order to do that, I just had to disengage FSD and drive manually, and I was trying to test how FSD would do it, not how I know I want it done. I appreciated the text prompts it would give sometimes for the reason it was doing something, but there were many more situations where it would do something with no explanation, and that was kind of frustrating. Often I would engage FSD, then turn it up to the max speed dial, and it won't actually go faster unless I press the accelerator pedal. Then, when I get it up to my desired speed, it would maintain that speed for a while until it would randomly start slowing down again. Once again, I'm not talking about driving crazy fast speeds here. Sometimes when there was nobody behind me, I would let it do its thing to see what it would do, and it would go way below the speed limit at unsafe speeds, where there's a risk of getting rear-ended going 45 miles an hour in a 65 mile an hour speed limit zone when most people are going 75 or 80 miles an hour. And that brings to my next point, which is the vehicle's understanding of the speed limit is way off on many rural highways. It was generally accurate on the interstate freeways, but we spent a lot of time on highways where the speed limit was typically 55 to 65 miles an hour, and it would often think the speed limit is 45 miles an hour for long distances. Our 2015 Model S with Mobileye reads the speed limit signs and is super accurate. The only times it messes up is when it's an electronic variable speed limit sign, or perhaps if there's a large vehicle on our right when we pass the speed limit sign, so it can't see the sign. I've heard that Mobileye patented that functionality, so Tesla is, I think, using a GPS database or something for keeping track of speed limits on roads, and it's not a very accurate method. Many times it would think the speed limit had changed and it would change my max speed set to slow down, so I'd have to then crank the speed back up so that it would be up to the speed limit, and that I know it is, and then I would have to manually press the accelerator pedal to get it back up to speed. Otherwise, it would just loiter at whatever speed it was at when I increased the max set speed. Many times in the city, it would turn corners more sharply than I would, and I'm nervous it's going to curb rash the right rear tire, so a couple of times I intervened for that reason. Many times it would randomly engage the windshield wipers with zero water in sight on a clearly sunny day. My only guess is that the false positive is it wiping the windshield, perhaps when there is a bug that splats in front of the camera. Otherwise, I have no idea. Sometimes when there were a couple of false positives, I'd turn off the windshield wipers. Then the next time we drove, it would be back to auto wipers and falsely wipe again. This wasn't a constant problem, but it happened several times. There were times when a vehicle in the other lane gets close to the dashed lane marker, but doesn't even cross over them, and the autopilot gets really cautious and starts slowing down when that person was beginning to apply corrective action to go back to their lane already, and I had to press the accelerator pedal to get it back up to speed. When exiting the freeway, it doesn't do it as smoothly as I do, meaning it stays on the freeway longer and then turns sharply and follows the lines up the exit ramp straight, which is abrupt and feels like it's going to miss the exit. Also, it sometimes will slow down to an unnatural speed when getting off of the freeway. Most of the time, it waits until half a mile before the exit to get over to the rightmost lane, which, depending on the traffic in the rightmost lane, was sometimes problematic. When we were in Arkansas driving to the Hot Springs National Park, and also the next day as we were leaving the Dallas, Texas area heading west, we drove in heavy rain continuously for many hours, and FSD would completely just stop working, and I would have to drive completely manually. In those situations, I am fine if it can't hack it anymore, but Tesla really should give us basic cruise control. Like, it doesn't even need to be adaptive. I'd be fine with just basic cruise control where the driver sets the speed and it maintains that speed. Most of what I've covered above are more on the critical side of the spectrum, but there were many times where I quite appreciated FSD. For instance, there were multiple times when we were in complicated driving situations where I wasn't sure which lane I should be in, and there was no visible sign telling me which lane to be in, so I would just let FSD do its thing, and it would often get me to the correct lane. However, there were other times when I could clearly see on the navigation screen that at the fork we needed to go in one direction and it would try to go in the other direction, so I'd have to yank it into the correct direction. The most obvious advantage of any kind of autopilot is to hand over the minutiae of hours of modulating the accelerator pedal to maintain the correct speed and the steering wheel to maintain the lane, and FSD did an excellent job of maintaining the lane with no ping-ponging back and forth that I've heard others have experienced. Fighting a strong side wind for hours can be tiring, and I love autopilot or FSD for doing all of that work for me. In general, I want to be able to train FSD to replicate my driving style, and it was annoying having it drive however Tesla engineers programmed it to drive and not be able to modify that. There were many times when the estimated arrival percentage was low, like 5%, which in those cases I drive very carefully because especially when it comes to acceleration, but FSD doesn't pay attention to that, so it fully accelerates regardless. So there were times when I would just disengage it in the city where there were lots of starts and stops, so I could drive really carefully and conservatively until we got to the supercharger. When we got home from our trip, I used it far less because we don't drive a lot on a daily basis, but I certainly used it anytime I went out, and my main annoyance is it is just too slow around town, and I was constantly in people's way, or rather, I would be annoyed if I were behind myself. I'm not talking about maintaining speeds, although that's part of the problem where it's going, say, 22 miles an hour in a 25 mile an hour zone for no particular reason, but I'm mostly just referring to intersections. It would arrive at the intersection, then was slower than I would like to get going again. Frankly, I found it kind of tedious, and I'm totally happy with driving manually around on city streets where there's far more nuance than just maintaining a set speed and staying in the lane on high-speed roads for hours at a time, which is where I really want a driver assistant. I fully recognize that there is a wide spectrum out there of driving styles, and Tesla's full self-driving is only programmed to drive in one particular way. If I had my preference, I would be able to coach it how to behave in specific situations, then it would replicate how I want it to behave. For instance, what if it just observed how I drove for a period of time, then replicated my driving style? Going forward, if I disengage FSD, it should observe what I do following the disengagement and modify its driving behavior accordingly in my specific car. I know that Tesla already does this, but then they apply it to their neural net, and then everyone gets kind of an average of everyone else's driving. If it went straight to level 5 autonomy so I could just not pay attention or go to sleep, then I guess I would care less about what its driving style is, but in its current state it certainly can't be trusted without supervision regardless of legal requirements. I'm happy that Tesla is innovating in this space, and it's been fun to finally be able to experience it for myself after hearing about FSD and watching YouTube videos of others using it for 8 years now. For most of that time, I was happy that I had Mobileye because I didn't have all of the problems that Tesla's autopilot had, and Mobileye worked reliably and consistently all of that time. Granted, my Mobileye Tesla doesn't increase in functionality, and it's locked in its current state of highway lane keeper and traffic-aware cruise control. But Mobileye's functionality is really all I want until FSD is reliably proven and legal to literally drive at 4 or 5 level. On the very last day of my FSD trial, my Model Y received a software update of FSD saying that the FSD driving stack is a single end-to-end neural network trained on millions of video clips. Okay, that's great, I think, and I was curious to see if I would notice the difference. So I took the car out at 10:30 p.m. just an hour and a half before I was going to lose the free FSD trial access. Today is April 30th, which is the last day of my full self-driving trial, and I just barely got this software update today, so 2024.3.25. I'm not sure why it breaks these out separate from each other, but the first one up here, it's saying that it's now a full neural net, both city streets and highway, and then here it has more information there. So I'm just going to take this out real quick and test it out before the end of the day, because I've only got an hour and a half left before I'm going to lose my trial. Okay, so this is crazy. I just had to share this. I had it drive me to a nearby park, and it did just fine getting there, and then I had it navigate to a city that's south of us, and then I canceled it pretty quickly, like before we even left the parking lot of the park. And now it's still driving. I just am so curious where it's taking me, because it's taking a convoluted route, just kind of driving randomly, and it has no destination on the screen. It's still just driving, and I'm now going up to a neighboring city north, and there's like absolutely no idea where it's taking me or why. It just keeps driving. This is crazy. So here's the end of the road that it took me all the way up on, and now it's turned on the blinker and it's having me go right. So it's still going somewhere. I'm probably going to just stop it here pretty soon because I'm just tired of it just driving around. But like, where does it think it's going? I have no idea. So I think I'm going to interrupt it here. It's still just kind of driving me around randomly, and I'm just tired of it putting extra miles on the car for no reason. But I mean, it's doing a great job of the driving. I think it has maybe improved. I don't have a really specific route, like a perfect A/B test. I've noticed it's accelerating pretty heavily, and so it's kind of nice. We used to be more timid that way. But yeah, I have no idea where it's taking me, but it's definitely getting farther and farther away from home. So I'm going to interrupt it now and go ahead and go back home. So this is interesting. I put in our home address, and it can't do a U-turn, it seems. It is now doing this big loop through a shopping complex to get back going south on the same road that I was going north on. It finally finished doing that turnaround maneuver, and it did something that I was actually impressed about. It started to turn right and then all of a sudden stopped, and I wasn't sure why. And then a bicyclist came off of the side road. You can see there's a bike lane over here, and he kind of turned in next to us, and the car had seen the bicyclist and I didn't. So kudos to the car for noticing that. I'm back home now, and I will say I think it's improved on the city streets driving. Now, I was doing this at night, and also there was virtually no traffic on the road, so that's harder to determine because the other cars on the road make a big difference in navigating. It still is a little bit more conservative and slow at intersections that I would like, and it uses the friction brakes more than I would like. But it seemed pretty confident driving everywhere, other than it was confident when I didn't even tell it where to go. So that was weird. But otherwise, it was fun to test it out, and today was the last day of that test. So now we'll go back to manually driving on the city streets. Paying to be a beta tester of Tesla's software kind of rubs me the wrong way. They should be paying me to use it and submit feedback as I drive. For this reason, I'm sure you can tell I already don't intend to purchase FSD even at $100 per month or $8,000 outright. I would be more tempted to purchase it for $8,000 if it was transferable to another vehicle. Or perhaps if it's tied to my Tesla account for any number of vehicles, but only up to, say, 1 million miles or something to that effect. I've heard of many others who feel like they've been deceived by Tesla by purchasing FSD, then having their vehicles totaled in a wreck, or perhaps just buying a new vehicle in a few years and they don't really get the promised benefit from it. I am a firm believer that you should only purchase something when it has the functionality that you want now, and to never purchase something based on future promises. Elon keeps speculating that someday FSD will be amazingly capable and legal, and that your vehicle can drive people around and make you money for you while you're not using it. And while that sounds great on paper, I'm not going to spend thousands of dollars on future promises, especially when that promise won't transfer to new vehicles or until I feel like the promised benefit has been achieved. Personally, I quite liked the functionality of Tesla's current basic autopilot paired with auto-resume autopilot from the Commander. And that's probably what I'm going to use going forward until something changes. I will continue to cheer on Tesla's innovation in the full self-driving software space, and I'll try it again someday given the opportunity. Honest question, would you be happy right now if you had purchased FSD in 2016 for $3,000, assuming of course that you fully intended to keep that vehicle for the last 8 years? Many people I know don't keep a vehicle for that long. I purchased a Hyundai Tucson back in 2012, and I fully intended to keep that vehicle for 10 plus years. But life changed, and despite my best intentions, I ended up selling that car only 4 years later. And to add to that, an 8-year-old Tesla doesn't actually have the powerful enough hardware to fully utilize the current full self-driving software. What do you think? I'd love to hear from you in the comments what you think of full self-driving tech, and whether or not you would purchase FSD now or not, and what your reasoning is. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video.